South African rugby is characterised by reinvention. Whereas New Zealand will always be dominant, Scotland will always be luckless, Georgia will always be giant, England will always be despised, France will always be so French, and Australia will always be pricks, South Africa's lineage is less consistent, no one colour running through their ledger, the Rainbow Nation living up to their name, having a very colourful rugby history well worth diving into. Except I'm not going to do that in any much detail because I figure everyone watching this video has already seen Invictus, and that kind of covers the more flavourful themes with considerably more Matt Damon than I can afford. And besides, there are lots of interesting things going on in South African rugby right now that Clint Eastwood never felt the need to awkwardly immortalise. South Africa have been one of the top few teams in Test rugby for as long as people have been forgetting Joel Stransky's name. However, in 2016 and 17, the Springboks slipped to their lowest ebb of the professional era, winning just 11 of 25 tests and falling to an all-time rankings low of 7th. But then, last year, the tide began to turn again. 2 wins over a rampant English team and a famous first victory in a decade in New Zealand suggested the Boks are back. But then losses in Twickenham, Cardiff and Buenos Aires suggested maybe the Boks are just springing up and down again. So, what went on with South African rugby? How did they manage to fix it? And how good are they actually, considering it's only a few months until they go and try to win that little heap of metal named after a dead schoolboy from Warwickshire? South Africa remain the only Tier 1 nation not to have played in every Rugby World Cup, with an apartheid boycott seeing them miss the first 2 tournaments. But when they did debut in 1995, they inspired the movie Invictus, which you've seen. They have then played in every World Cup since, winning it again in 2007 and finishing 3rd in 1999 and 2015. However, finishing 3rd wasn't exactly South Africa's most memorable moment from the 2015 tournament, after they, of course, kicked things off by being on the wrong side of the biggest upset in rugby, never mind Rugby World Cup history, as they lost to 500-1 outsiders, Japan. That loss was pretty much inexcusable from a South African perspective, especially considering the way they seemingly took control of the game late on with this try by cave troll Boris Johnson himself, Adrian Strauss, before then somehow going on to lose it again. South Africa did, however, strike back with sheer fury, but beating Wales and Argentina beyond the pools was not enough. Coach and Springbok superfan Heineke Meyer was gone, a scapegoat for the shame of giving worldwide rugby fans such celebrations. In his place came Alistair Coetzee, a man who never quite looked at home in a tracksuit. Coetzee was a left field choice, his Super Rugby record hardly glittering, the standout on his CV being 2 Currie Cup titles he won after taking a step down to coach Western Province. However, it felt like South Africa were very aware of his shortcomings as well and never quite trusted him. Though nominally the man in charge, Coetzee was given less freedom to take his own path than Friedrich Nietzsche playing House of the Dead. The SARU appointed his assistants, they reportedly suggested styles of rugby for his team to play, and they even had a panel who could outvote him on team selection. Think of that South African team as being like the movie Suicide Squad. There's a fair likelihood the director's vision still would have been kind of shit, but the fact so many suits got involved and began to dictate what must happen made the whole thing into an even more bloated mess of which nobody was proud. And so, with results waning and everybody unhappy with what was going on, out went Alistair and in came then Munster boss Rassie Erasmus. In order to avoid having the same issues as Coetzee, Erasmus added a term to his contract. He was to be appointed not only South Africa's head coach, but he was also going to take the position of Springboks Director of Rugby, a job that previously didn't exist and technically made him his own boss. However, by taking one job in a tracksuit and one in a sharp suit, Erasmus, whose name sounds like a brand of magic stationery, managed to avoid the traps Coetzee had fallen prey to and retain autonomy over the Springboks. Since taking over, his impact has been felt far and wide across Rainbow Nation rugby. He's altered rules surrounding overseas players, he's been far more frank and upfront on the issues of racial quotas, and appointed Siya Kolisi as the first black captain of the Springboks. As anybody who's even read the synopsis of Invictus will know, this was a big deal and a move that helped unite a nation behind the team and saw interest soar. TV audiences increased just over 50% for Kolisi's first series in charge, and it caused no controversy because, simply put, Kolisi was the man for the job. He'd been South Africa's best player the previous year and the obvious man to lead the nation. Erasmus was keeping out politics like a true nerd boy. This decision was purely rugby and nobody could disagree. which only heightened the political significance. And sticking to rugby, Rassie Erasmus's main impact since taking over has been to implement this common sense first thinking to time on the pitch as well. Under Alistair Coetzee, a man who permanently looked like he just lost his zebra, South Africa played a game with more moving pieces than John Wick in a removal truck. The team's shape and each player's positioning changed depending on where they were in the field, and roles were assigned to players that were incredibly specific and yet worked against each other. Back rowers were often expected to be on the wing to spread the defence, and then 4 seconds later in the centre of the field to clear out. It was an ultra delicate plan that required 99 things out of 100 to go right, and if any more than that went wrong, everything fell apart. With Coetzee trusting odds that were against him like only a man who got his job on a 500 to 1 outside bet could. There was simply too much going on. Players were coming in, playing one way for their club, and then expected to potentially learn a dozen different styles in a fortnight. Coetzee was often characterised as an idiot, but in fact he was more like a mad scientist in a sci-fi movie. He had so many ideas, so many things he wanted to do, that he never stopped to ask what might happen as a result of them. Put it like this, if Coetzee designed cars, he'd give the driver's seat an ice cream maker which could only be used whilst the car was in motion. In some ways, it's a solid idea, but man alive is it not practical. Under Erasmus, however, things make sense. Instead of hoping for one player to be in two places at the same time, Erasmus likes to make sure two players are in any one space at any time. When the ball is in a ruck, South Africa split into units. The fly half stands alone, the main decision maker, ready to choose which unit to use, but everyone else in the team is paired with somebody who complements them. It might be a ball carrier and a distributor together, it might be a forward with another forward to clear out, but this game plan relies on no one being alone until the ball is in motion, at which point the players split apart and the plan becomes far more fluid. This is only a slight twist on a common structure of using your forwards, but by filtering in back, South Africa can add variety and spice where teams are used to expecting crash, bang and wallop. However, before the ball can even get to those units, it has to go through perhaps South Africa's most important player. Don't call me Francois himself, Faf de Klerk. Though he looks like a Lego minifigure or surfer dude, de Klerk fits the cliche, he's the heartbeat of the team, better than almost anybody else. And this is evident in the way he's improved over the last few years, keeping to his country's theme and reinventing himself as a much wiser player. There's a lot made about the Springboks player drain, but leaving Super Rugby to play Premiership Rugby with its rain, rucks and 6 free final scores has made de Klerk into a better player. When he first burst onto the scene, the Fafmeister made a name for himself by slaying giants and adding a fresh new tempo to South Africa's game. However, this tempo wasn't always as good a thing as it might have seemed at the time. Playing with early years de Klerk was like having a heartbeat of 200 at all times. And seeing as South Africa aren't beloved character Chev Chelios from the film Crank starring Jason Statham, the Springboks didn't always know how to cope with this, and on occasions it had a negative impact on their game. He simply played too fast for the Springboks. This wasn't something much talked about at the time because his ability to whip the ball away right away seemed impressive and exciting. But since spending 90 minutes a week waiting to box kick in the Prem, de Klerk has learned to slow his game down when necessary. Now, his default mode is far calmer. He makes tactical decisions as well as instinctive ones. But when his team needs it, he can still act as a defibrillator and get that heartbeat right up. De Klerk is frankly vital to how the Springboks play. The second test against the All Blacks last year was lost after he went off, and the Boks looked a lesser team without him there to play England and Wales. Seeing as literally hundreds of players have left the South African clubs in order to play for Sale Sharks and occasionally other teams in Europe, South Africa have been forced to create depth in many positions, and whilst Ambrose Papier is a very good player, you fear their World Cup run is dependent on keeping Faf on the field. Because at full firepower, I think the South Africa team has it in them. While Scotland, Argentina and France are all capable of almost fluking big wins before reverting back to being shit the next game, England and Ireland are competent to an extreme degree, and that might be enough. South Africa, for me, sit next to only Wales as the team most able to raise their own game at will. They can't hit it every week, and this may be a problem given the fact that the World Cup is 7 games and you need to win at least 6 of them. But the All Blacks, who will always be dominant aside, I don't think there's anyone I wouldn't back South Africa against in a knockout match. South African rugby has always been characterised by reinvention, and their climb from their worst ever placement to a 3rd World Cup might be their greatest reinvention of all. We are just violently approaching the Rugby World Cup 2019, which, for anyone unaware, is a competition being played this September in Japan in order to decide what the best team in the rugby is. And I'm doing videos on all 20 teams in that competition about the rugby. So that is the one on South Africa, if you weren't paying attention. And there are obviously going to be 8 more of those. The next one's going to be up next week. 8 more of those tick along, and then hence 11 more of these on the channel. You see a link float up below me soon enough. So thank you for watching that. Thank you for anyone that thought, I like that, gonna chuck a few pennies towards on Patreon, because it's allowed me to hit up when I'm doing this, allowing me to put in the time and research and etc. I do into making these videos, so thank you. And additionally, I'm going to be, soon enough, I'm working on my plans for the World Cup itself and for what I'm going to do when we get there, so hopefully I'm going to start to talk about that soon enough, because we are only just a few months away. Thank you once more. I'll see you next week.